Hey everyone! Before we dive into one of the most incredible tank battles you've never heard about, make sure you hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. It really helps us bring you more amazing war stories. And here's my question for you. Where in the world are you watching from? Drop your country or city in the comments below. I love hearing from our global community of history enthusiasts. Your support means everything. Now, let's get into this remarkable story. September 19th, 1944. Lorraine, France. Morning fog blankets the rolling farmland around a small village called Arracourt. Inside their Sherman tanks, American crews can barely see 50 yards ahead. They know what's coming. German intelligence reports spoke of new panzer brigades, fresh Panthers straight from the factory, crews eager to prove themselves. The Germans are laughing. Why wouldn't they be? Their Panther tanks mount guns that can penetrate a Sherman from over a mile away. The Sherman's 75mm gun? Worthless against a Panther's frontal armor. The math is simple, brutal. 1 Panther equals 5 Shermans. Everyone knows it. The Americans know it. The Germans certainly know it. At 0800 hours, 42 German Panthers emerge from the fog near the town of Lezey. Captain Richard Lamison's Company C, just 17 Shermans, stands between them and the entire American command post. The Panthers advance confidently. This should be a slaughter. But 3 minutes later, 4 Panthers are burning wrecks. 8 minutes after that, 8 more are destroyed. By afternoon, 43 German tanks litter the battlefield. American losses? 5 Shermans. Oh. Stay with me, because what happened in those fog-shrouded fields would rewrite the book on armored warfare. The late summer of 1944 found General George S. Patton's Third Army racing across France, riding the momentum of the Normandy breakout. 4 weeks, his armored spearheads had sliced through disorganized German resistance, liberating town after town. But by mid-September, that glorious advance had slowed to a crawl. Fuel shortages, stretched supply lines, and stiffening German resistance brought Patton's tanks to a grinding halt in the rolling hills of Lorraine. The 4th Armored Division, commanded by Major General John S. Wood and led in the field by the aggressive Lieutenant Colonel Creighton Abrams, had pushed across the Moselle River near Nancy. Combat Command A, under Colonel Bruce Clark, established positions around the small agricultural town of Arracourt. They were dangerously exposed, thinly spread across open farmland, with their supply lines vulnerable and their flanks in the air. The men of the 37th Tank Battalion knew they were in a precarious position. Most crews had only been in combat since late July. They'd spent the summer chasing a retreating enemy, rarely facing serious tank-versus-tank combat. Their M4 Sherman tanks, reliable, mechanically sound, easy to maintain, were nevertheless outclassed by the latest German armor. The Sherman's low-velocity 75mm gun and relatively thin armor made it, on paper, a poor match for German Panthers and Tigers. But these young American tankers had learned to survive through speed, teamwork, and aggressive tactics. They trusted their hydraulic turrets that could traverse faster than any German design. They relied on excellent coordination between tanks, infantry, artillery, and the fighter bombers circling above. Most importantly, they had leaders like Captain James "Jimmy" Leach, Captain Richard Lamison, and Captain William Spencer, men who understood that tank warfare wasn't just about gun size and armor thickness. Meanwhile, 60 miles to the east, German General Otto von Manschufel prepared his counteroffensive. Hitler himself had demanded action. The Americans had to be stopped, pushed back, destroyed. The 5th Panzer Army assembled 2 fresh Panzer brigades, the 111th and 113th, equipped with brand-new Panther tanks rolling straight from the factories. These were Germany's finest medium tanks, 75mm high-velocity guns, sloped armor up to 100mm thick, superior range and penetration. Combined with Panzer IVs and assault guns, Manschufel commanded over 260 armored vehicles. The stage was set for what would become the largest tank battle fought by American forces on the Western Front until the Battle of the Bulge. But this wouldn't be the German victory Berlin expected. The 4th Armored Division had earned its reputation as Patton's tip of the spear. Since breaking out of Normandy in late July, they'd covered hundreds of miles, capturing thousands of prisoners and destroying countless enemy vehicles. The division's aggressive tactics and rapid advances had made it legendary. Lieutenant Colonel Creighton Abrams, commanding the 37th Tank Battalion, embodied this fighting spirit. He would later have America's main battle tank named after him. But by mid-September, the division faced a new reality. They'd outrun their supplies. Gasoline trucks couldn't keep pace with the armored columns. Ammunition stocks dwindled. Replacement tanks arrived slowly. The easy victories of August had given way to hard fighting against German units that were finally organizing coherent defensive positions. Combat Command A occupied a dangerously exposed salient around Arracourt. Colonel Clark had fewer than 10,000 men spread across miles of French farmland. His force consisted of the 37th Tank Battalion, about 50 Shermans at various states of readiness, the 10th Armored Infantry Battalion, the 24th Armored Engineer Battalion, and crucial support from the 704th Tank Destroyer Battalion. 3 artillery battalions provided fire support, the 22nd, 66th, and 94th Armored Field Artillery Battalions, equipped with 105 mm howitzers. The terrain around Arracourt featured gentle rolling hills covered in agricultural fields, small patches of forest, and typical French villages. The land was crisscrossed with farm roads and dotted with low-lying areas that collected heavy morning fog, a common occurrence in September. These fog banks could reduce visibility to less than 100 yards and typically didn't burn off until late morning or early afternoon. On the German side, Hitler's orders had been explicit: counterattack, drive the Americans back across the Moselle, recapture Nancy, and restore the front line. General von Manschufel, who had only assumed command of 5th Panzer Army on September 1st, worked frantically to assemble forces for the offensive. The 111th and 113th Panzer Brigades were formed from scratch, new organizations with factory-fresh equipment but inadequately trained crews. Many panzer crews had only weeks of experience with their vehicles. The brigades lacked proper reconnaissance units, a critical deficiency that would prove fatal. The 111th Panzer Brigade, commanded by Colonel von Seckendorf, fielded 45 Panther tanks and 45 Panzer IV medium tanks, plus supporting infantry. The 113th Panzer Brigade had a similar composition. Supporting them was the veteran but understrength 11th Panzer Division. On paper, this force significantly outgunned Clark's Combat Command A. German propaganda had built the Panther's reputation to mythical proportions. It was presented as invincible, capable of destroying any Allied tank at ranges exceeding a mile while being impervious to return fire. This reputation wasn't entirely undeserved. The Panther's 75 mm KWK-42L/70 gun could penetrate 140 mm of armor at 1,000 meters. The Sherman's gun? It couldn't penetrate a Panther's frontal armor at any practical combat range. But tanks don't fight in isolation, and technical specifications don't account for tactics, training, or terrain. The Americans were about to prove this in devastating fashion. The psychological warfare had already begun before a single shot was fired. German soldiers had been told their Panthers were unbeatable. Training manuals emphasized the technical superiority of German engineering. Radio broadcasts proclaimed that the new Panzer brigades would sweep the Americans back into the sea. The Panther tank, Germany's answer to the Soviet T-34, was presented as the ultimate weapon, combining firepower, protection, and mobility in perfect harmony. This confidence wasn't entirely misplaced. In direct, open-field engagements at long range, a Panther enjoyed tremendous advantages. Its gun could engage and destroy Shermans at distances where American tankers couldn't even hope to return effective fire. The psychological impact of facing Panthers had already taken its toll on Allied morale throughout the summer. American tank crews had developed a fatalistic attitude, calling every German tank a tiger regardless of its actual type. The mere sight of enemy armor triggered memories of watching friendly tanks burn. But reality on the battlefield rarely matched the propaganda. The factory-fresh Panthers of the 111th and 113th Panzer Brigades came with serious problems. The Panther was mechanically complex. Its Maybach engine and transmission required meticulous maintenance. The interleaved road wheel design, while providing excellent cross-country performance, was prone to freezing in winter and clogging with mud. Panthers broke down frequently, and field repairs were difficult. The German army even published a special manual, the Pantherfibel, just to help crews deal with the tank's maintenance demands. More critically, the new Panzer brigades lacked combat experience. Their crews had minimal training time with their vehicles. They'd never worked together as cohesive units. Their officers were unfamiliar with the men under their command. This stood in stark contrast to the American 4th Armored Division, whose tank crews had been fighting together since Normandy, developing the instinctive coordination that only comes from shared combat experience. The American Sherman, meanwhile, suffered from an unfair reputation. Yes, it was called a Ronson, the cigarette lighter that lights first every time, because of its tendency to catch fire when penetrated. British tankers' gallows humor reflected real terror. But the Sherman had crucial advantages that propaganda and technical specifications didn't capture. It was reliable. Shermans rarely broke down, and when they did, repairs were straightforward. American logistics kept spare parts flowing to frontline units. Tank retrieval teams operated constantly, recovering damaged Shermans even while battles raged, getting them repaired and back into action within hours or days rather than weeks. The Sherman was fast and maneuverable on solid ground. Its Euro-stabilized gun allowed accurate firing while moving, a capability German tanks lacked. Its hydraulic turret traverse was significantly faster than the Panther's manual system, allowing Sherman crews to acquire targets and get shots off more quickly in close-range encounters. Most importantly, American doctrine emphasized combined arms warfare. Shermans never fought alone. They operated with infantry, tank destroyers, artillery, and close air support in coordinated actions. German doctrine, by contrast, still emphasized tank-pure operations, reflecting older thinking about armored warfare. The stage was set for a collision between myth and reality, between technical superiority and tactical excellence. The fog-shrouded fields around Arracourt would determine which mattered more. The battlefield around Arracourt presented both opportunities and challenges for armored operations. The Lorraine region features gently rolling terrain, not the flat plains ideal for tank warfare, but not impassable mountains either. Open agricultural fields, separated by hedgerows and occasional tree lines, offered good sight lines in clear weather but limited opportunities for concealment. Small forests provided cover but could trap unwary vehicles. Villages, built of stone and clustered along main roads, created natural strongpoints. The Americans held the high ground, a critical advantage in armored combat. Combat Command A's positions occupied ridges and hills that overlooked the approaches from the east and south. These elevated positions allowed American observers to spot enemy movements at distance while keeping their own vehicles hull down, exposing only their turrets. Hull-down positions multiplied the Sherman's survival chances. Even though its armor was thin, a hull-down tank presented a much smaller target and protected its vulnerable lower hull. The road network in the area consisted of main routes connecting Nancy to Château-Salins and Metz to Strasbourg, with numerous farm tracks branching off. These roads would channel German advances, making their routes somewhat predictable. The Americans had spent days reconnoitering the area, learning which positions offered the best fields of fire, which roads could support heavy traffic, and where vehicles might bog down in soft ground. Water features played a role too. The Marne-Rhine Canal ran through the region, and various small streams created natural obstacles. September rains had softened the ground in low-lying areas, making off-road movement treacherous for heavy vehicles. The Germans' 45-ton Panthers would sink into mud more readily than the lighter 30-ton Shermans. But the most significant terrain feature wasn't on any map, it was the weather. September mornings in Lorraine bring heavy fog that settles into the valleys and low ground. This dense fog, sometimes reducing visibility to less than 75 yards, would fundamentally alter the battle's dynamics. On the morning of September 19, 1944, the fog was particularly thick. It rolled across the fields in heavy banks, obscuring everything more than a stone's throw away. Tank commanders standing in their turrets could barely see the next vehicle in their column. Vision blocks and periscopes were useless. Sound became the primary sense, the rumble of engines, the squeak of tracks, the distinctive notes that told experienced ears whether that approaching vehicle was friend or foe. For the Germans, this fog was both blessing and curse. It provided cover from American fighter bombers that would otherwise dominate the battlefield. No P-47 Thunderbolt could strafe columns it couldn't see. But the fog also negated the Panther's greatest advantage, their long-range guns. What good was a gun that could kill at 1,500 meters when you couldn't see beyond 75? For the Americans, The fog transformed the tactical situation entirely. Close-range combat favored the more maneuverable Sherman with its faster turret traverse. The fog allowed American tanks to move unseen, setting up ambush positions and flanking attacks that would be suicidal in clear weather. It leveled the playing field, turning the battle from a long-range shooting gallery into a knife fight where speed and positioning mattered more than armor thickness. The terrain and weather had set the perfect stage for a tactical masterpiece. At 0700 hours on September 19th, Captain William A. Dwight, liaison officer for the 37th Tank Battalion, was driving his jeep between Combat Command A headquarters and the battalion's forward positions. He was making a routine check, carrying messages, coordinating movements, the unglamorous work that kept an armored unit functioning. As he drove through the fog near the village of Moncourt, Dwight suddenly heard a sound that made his blood run cold, the distinctive rumble of heavy-tracked vehicles, the particular pitch of diesel engines that didn't belong to American vehicles. He peered into the fog and saw shapes materializing, low, angular hulls, long gun barrels, the unmistakable silhouettes of German panzers. Dwight didn't hesitate. He spun his jeep around and raced back toward CCA headquarters, his driver pushing the vehicle to its limits. They roared into the headquarters area at Arracourt, Dwight already shouting before the jeep stopped. Panzers! Column of panzers coming from Moncourt. 20 or 25 of them. Colonel Bruce Clark absorbed this information with the calm of an experienced commander, but his mind raced through the implications. CCA's positions were scattered. Most of his armor was dispersed across miles of front. The Germans were already inside his perimeter. He immediately ordered Captain James Jimmy Leach's B Company, 37th Tank Battalion, to return from their position at Chambry. But Leach's tanks were miles away. They wouldn't arrive for at least 30 minutes. Clark had one asset immediately available, a platoon of M18 Hellcat tank destroyers from C Company, 704th Tank Destroyer Battalion, commanded by Captain Thomas J. Evans. These lightly armored but highly mobile vehicles mounted 76mm guns, more potent than the Sherman's 75mm, capable of penetrating a Panther's side armor. Clark personally walked down to where the tank destroyer crews were preparing breakfast and gave the order, "Get moving, enemy armor approaching from the east." Within minutes, 4 Hellcats were racing toward positions along the road from Moncourt. Their crews worked frantically, selecting firing positions that would allow them to engage the German column. The young soldiers, many barely old enough to drink, knew they were outgunned and outnumbered. Tank destroyers were designed to ambush enemy armor, fire a few rounds, and relocate before return fire could find them. But there was nowhere to relocate to. This would be a stand-up fight. 4 miles northeast of Arracourt, Captain Richard Lamison's C Company, 37th Tank Battalion, occupied positions around the crossroads village of Lezey. 17 Sherman tanks, most mounting the standard 75mm gun, were dispersed in concealed positions with good fields of observation. They'd been here since the previous day, establishing outposts, learning the ground, identifying good firing positions. Lamison's first indication of trouble came not from sight but from sound, the low rumble of heavy engines to the northeast, growing louder. He ordered his crews to battle stations and peered into the fog through his tank commander's cupola. Somewhere out there in the gray murk, German armor was advancing. He could hear them but couldn't see them yet. The 113th Panzer Brigade was coming, and they had no idea they were about to walk into a killing ground. Captain Thomas Evans positioned his 4 M18 Hellcats in a hasty defensive line southwest of CCA headquarters. The fog was so thick his crews could barely see from one vehicle to the next. They waited, engines idling, gunners peering through their sights at empty gray mist, every man's nerves wound tight as piano wire. Then, suddenly, the fog parted slightly and massive shapes appeared. Panthers from the 2113th Panzer Battalion, advancing in column formation directly toward the American positions. The German tanks were moving confidently, their crews not expecting resistance this deep in American territory. Evans' gunner fired first. The 76mm gun cracked, the sharp report rolling across the fields. 800 meters away, a Panther shuddered as the armor-piercing round struck its side, the weaker side armor that couldn't stand up to even medium-caliber rounds. The Panther slewed to a halt, smoke beginning to pour from its engine deck. The other Hellcats opened fire in rapid succession. At this range, against side armor, they were deadly. But the Germans recovered quickly from their surprise. Panther main guns traversed, seeking targets. The German gunners were well trained. Peacetime German army standards demanded excellence. Return fire came rapidly. The first Hellcat exploded in a shower of sparks and flame. A Panther's 75mm round had struck it directly. The thin armor of the tank destroyer, designed for speed over protection, offered no resistance. The crew didn't have time to bail out. Seconds later, a second Hellcat was hit, then a third. The surviving Hellcat commander, seeing his platoon destroyed, made the decision to withdraw before his vehicle shared their fate. But the tank destroyers had bought precious time. They'd destroyed 9 Panthers in the opening exchange and disrupted the German advance. More critically, they'd alerted the entire command to the attack's location and strength. American artillery immediately began ranging in on the reported positions. Self-propelled M7 Priest howitzers from the supporting artillery battalions wheeled into position and began firing direct fire at the advancing panzers, 105mm high-explosive shells that wouldn't penetrate armor but would kill external equipment, blind vision ports, and terrorize crews. Meanwhile, at Lezey, Captain Lamison's situation went from tense to critical in seconds. Panthers from the 113th Panzer Brigade's lead battalion materialized from the fog barely 75 yards from his forward positions, point-blank range for tank combat. But Lamison's crews were ready. They'd been waiting, hull down behind rises in the ground, guns laid on likely avenues of approach. The first 3 Panthers appeared and American guns fired almost simultaneously. At this range, even the Sherman's 75mm gun could penetrate a Panther's side armor. All 3 German tanks were hit within seconds, erupting in flames. The surviving Panthers in the column, suddenly under fire from concealed positions, attempted to turn and bring their heavier frontal armor to bear. But turning exposed their sides even more. Lamison's platoon leaders were calling targets, coordinating fire. One Sherman would illuminate a target, another would kill it. Textbook tank platoon tactics, executed with precision born of months fighting together. 5 more Panthers were destroyed in rapid succession before the remaining German tanks broke and withdrew to the south, seeking cover and trying to reorganize. But Lamison wasn't done with them. The sudden violence of the ambush shattered German confidence like glass. These panzer crews, young, inexperienced, convinced of their technical superiority, had expected to roll through American positions like a steamroller. Instead, they'd been hit hard, from unexpected directions, by an enemy who seemed to materialize out of the fog and then vanish again. The psychological impact of burning Panthers couldn't be overstated. Each destroyed tank represented a massive investment in resources, training, and prestige. These weren't obsolete Panzer IIIs or Czech-made tanks. These were Panthers, Germany's finest, the tanks that were supposed to restore German armored dominance. Watching them brew up, seeing the distinctive black smoke of burning diesel fuel, hearing the screams of trapped crewmen over the radio, it broke something in the attacking units. German radio discipline began to break down. Panicked voices reported enemy tanks everywhere, wildly exaggerating American strength. Commanders trying to coordinate their units found their subordinates increasingly unresponsive. The lack of reconnaissance meant German officers had no accurate picture of the battlefield. They were fighting blind, literally and figuratively, unable to distinguish between reports of scattered resistance and major defensive positions. The fog amplified every fear. A Sherman could be 10 yards away, waiting in ambush, and you wouldn't see it until your tank was already burning. German crews began seeing enemies everywhere. Every shadow in the fog became a potential threat, every suspicious noise a nearby American tank. Some crews refused to advance, claiming engine problems or mechanical issues. Others advanced too cautiously, moving at a crawl, negating what mobility advantages the Panther possessed. For the Americans, by contrast, the fog became their ally. Sherman crews developed a deadly rhythm, move forward to a firing position, engage targets at close range where their guns were effective, then withdraw over a reverse slope before German guns could return fire accurately. The faster hydraulic turret traverse of the Sherman proved its worth. American gunners could acquire and engage targets several precious seconds faster than their German counterparts. Captain Lamison executed a textbook tactical maneuver. As the Panthers withdrew south from Lezey, He quickly moved 4 Shermans to a ridge position overlooking the German line of retreat. His tanks crested the ridge in line formation, all 4 appearing simultaneously, and opened fire at 900 yards against the Panther's exposed sides as they fled. 5 more German tanks were destroyed before the survivors scattered into the fog. By mid-morning, German commanders were receiving increasingly desperate reports. One battalion reported 50% casualties. Another couldn't locate half its companies. The 113th Panzer Brigade, which had begun the attack with over 40 Panthers, was combat ineffective by 0900 hours. The Americans seemed to be everywhere, hitting from unexpected angles, disappearing before effective counterfire could be organized. German morale collapsed. Crews began abandoning functional tanks, convinced they were surrounded and cut off. Some Panthers were found later, completely intact, simply left behind by crews who'd fled on foot. The psychological shock of the ambush proved more devastating than the physical casualties, though those were severe enough. The myth of Panther invincibility died in the fog-shrouded fields around Lezey that morning, and the Germans still had to face American artillery, American air power, and more American armor arriving every hour. As the fog began to lift around noon on September 19th, the true scale of the German disaster became apparent. The fields around Arracourt, Lezey, and Moncourt were littered with burning or abandoned German armor. American reconnaissance teams began the grim work of counting and documenting destroyed enemy vehicles. By the end of the day, Combat Command A reported 43 German tanks destroyed, mostly factory-new Panthers, along with several Panzer IVs. Many more had been damaged or abandoned by their crews. The 113th Panzer Brigade, which had begun the attack with such confidence, had effectively ceased to exist as a combat-effective unit. The 111th Panzer Brigade, supporting the attack, had suffered similar casualties. American losses stood at 5 M4 Sherman tanks totally destroyed, 3 M18 Hellcat tank destroyers knocked out, and approximately 20 more vehicles damaged but reparable. Personnel casualties were remarkably light, 6 killed, 13 wounded. Tank retrieval crews from the 4th Armored Division's Maintenance Battalion were already working to recover damaged American vehicles, towing them back to field repair facilities where they could be patched up and returned to service within days. The human cost for the Germans was staggering. Each destroyed Panther represented 5 young men: driver, bow gunner, gunner, loader, and commander. Many crews burned alive in their tanks, trapped by jammed hatches or unconscious from the initial impact. Others bailed out successfully only to be captured by American infantry mopping up the battlefield. German casualty reports for the day listed over 400 men killed, wounded, or missing. Survivors from German units told consistent stories. They'd been advancing confidently when suddenly American fire erupted from multiple directions. They couldn't see the enemy, couldn't coordinate responses, couldn't bring their superior firepower to bear. Tank commanders reported shooting at shadows, wasting ammunition on suspected positions that turned out to be empty. The fog had disoriented them completely. General Patton himself drove to Arracourt late on September 19th, wanting to see the battlefield firsthand. He met with General Wood and Colonel Clark, congratulating them on a well-fought action. Always aggressive, Patton wanted Combat Command A to immediately pursue the retreating Germans. Clark, more cautiously, argued for consolidating positions and waiting for reinforcements. The Germans still had substantial forces in the area. This battle wasn't over. Indeed, von Manschufel wasn't ready to concede defeat. The 5th Panzer Army still had the 111th Panzer Brigade relatively intact and elements of the 11th Panzer Division available. Over the next several days, he would launch repeated attacks against American positions around Arracourt. Each time, the pattern repeated, German armor advancing with technical superiority, running into American positions that exploited terrain, coordinated with artillery and air support, and picked the Germans apart. By September 29th, when the Battle of Arracourt finally concluded, German losses exceeded 260 armored vehicles, virtually the entire force assembled for the counteroffensive. American losses totaled approximately 48 tanks and tank destroyers. The exchange ratio was devastating. For every American vehicle lost, the Germans lost more than 5. The 111th and 113th Panzer Brigades were withdrawn from the line, so badly mauled they required complete reconstitution. The dream of stopping Patton's advance had died in the fog around Arracourt. The Battle of Arracourt became a case study in military academies around the world. For decades after the war, it was taught at the U.S. Army's Command and General Staff College as an example of how to fight defensively with inferior equipment against a technically superior foe. The lessons learned that September continue to influence armored doctrine today. First and foremost, Arracourt demonstrated that technical specifications don't determine battlefield outcomes. The Panther was, on paper, vastly superior to the Sherman. In a one-on-one duel at long range on flat, open terrain, a Panther would win almost every time. But battlefields aren't one-on-one duels. Terrain, weather, tactics, training, logistics, and combined arms coordination all matter more than gun caliber or armor thickness. The Americans succeeded because they fought smart, not hard. They used terrain to negate German firepower advantages. They exploited weather conditions that leveled the playing field. They coordinated infantry, armor, artillery, and air power in seamless combined arms operations. They had better reconnaissance, better intelligence, and better situational awareness. Their logistics kept vehicles running and ammunition flowing. Most critically, their crews had trained together for months, developing the instinctive teamwork that combat demands. The Germans failed because they ignored fundamental tactical principles. They attacked without adequate reconnaissance, advancing blindly into unknown terrain against an enemy whose dispositions they didn't understand. They failed to concentrate their forces, launching piecemeal attacks that allowed the Americans to defeat them in detail. Their inexperienced crews couldn't adapt when confronted with unexpected situations. Their poor logistics meant damaged vehicles couldn't be recovered or repaired. Their rigid command structure couldn't respond flexibly to changing battlefield conditions. Captain Jimmy Leach, who fought through the entire battle, later reflected, "The Panthers were better tanks technically, no question. But tanks don't fight by themselves. Our advantage was teamwork, was knowing the ground, was having artillery that could drop rounds on target in 2 minutes, was having P-47s overhead whenever the weather cleared. We fought as a team. They fought as individual tanks." The battle also validated American production philosophy. The United States built over 49,000 Sherman tanks during the war, more than Germany and Britain combined produced of all types. German industry built only about 6,000 Panthers. Even with a 5-to-1 loss ratio, which Arracourt proved wasn't inevitable, American numerical superiority would prevail. War is about industrial capacity as much as technical excellence. For the German army, Arracourt represented another nail in the coffin. The Panther brigades had been Hitler's great hope for restoring mobility to the Western Front. Their destruction eliminated any chance of launching effective counteroffensives in Lorraine. The Wehrmacht's armored reserve had been squandered in a poorly planned attack against well-prepared defenders. The soldiers who fought at Arracourt carried those memories for life. Captain Kenneth Lamison later became a full colonel, continuing to serve in the army for decades. His tactical masterpiece at Lezey, destroying 12 Panthers with minimal losses, became legendary in armored circles. Lieutenant Colonel Creighton Abrams went on to command U.S. forces in Vietnam and became Army Chief of Staff. The main battle tank that replaced the M60 was named the M1 Abrams in his honor, a fitting tribute to a man who proved that skill and courage could overcome superior firepower. The Battle of Arracourt reminds us that warfare isn't decided by specifications and statistics alone. Yes, the Panther was a better tank than the Sherman by almost every technical measure. But war is fought by people, not machines. It's won by units that train together, by commanders who understand terrain and tactics, by soldiers who refuse to quit even when facing supposedly superior enemies. Those young American tank crews, average age barely 21, faced down Germany's finest armor and won decisively. They did it through courage, skill, and teamwork. They proved that sometimes the inferior weapon, in the right hands under the right conditions, defeats the superior one. The lesson echoes through military history. Never underestimate an enemy, never overestimate your equipment, and never forget that the human element, training, morale, leadership, adaptability, matters more than hardware. So here's my question for you. If you were Captain Lamison, facing 40 Panthers with just 17 Shermans, would you have stood your ground? Or would you have withdrawn and lived to fight another day? Let me know in the comments below. And don't forget to like and subscribe. We've got more incredible war stories coming your way.